Hey. Many countries resort to military intervention when it comes to enforcing control in foreign areas, something that the United States knows all too well. But sometimes mistakes are made, and the consequences can be severe. And that's exactly what happened in the case of the Iran Air 655 incident back in 1988. But the story begins 9 years earlier, with the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The following year, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, starting what would be an 8-year-long war that would spill the blood of nearly 1 million people. And at the time, the United States supported Hussein, so the Navy stationed ships in the Persian Gulf to protect oil trade routes and fight against Iranian forces. But towards the end of the war, on July 3rd of 1988, Iran Air Flight 655 took off for Dubai from a nearby Bandar Abbas International Airport. The Vincennes, one of the stationed Navy ships in the Gulf, mistook the airliner for an F-14 fighter jet and fired 2 missiles. The aircraft was destroyed on impact, killing all 290 passengers and crew members on board. We've contacted Kenneth Pollack, former CIA analyst and current scholar at the Brookings Institute. First of all, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, in your studies of the Flight 655, what do you think were the impacts of the incident?
Well, first of all, we need to get one thing straight. The shootdown of Flight 655 was an accident. Whether it was the heat of the battle or the fact that the plane did not identify itself, the US Navy did not purposely shoot down that plane. However, that's not how it was seen in Tehran. The Iranian government assumed that we did indeed attack the plane on purpose. They were convinced that the US had openly decided to enter the war on Iraq's side. So though it brought Tehran closer to ending the war, it definitely hurt our relationships with the government and intensified any feelings of anti-American sentiment amongst the people.
Indeed, and you can read more about US-Iran relations in his latest book, The Persian Puzzle. I ran to the nearest bookstore as soon as it came out. When we return, we will discuss Washington's response to the incident.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
All the pretty girls stand up. All the pretty boys stand up.
I live in fear of a felony. I never stop felonies. West Coast G's. If you got it, better flow me. Another one. 2 of America's most wanted.
Forget the telly, we just go to the crib and watch a movie in the jacuzzi. Smoke L's while you do me.
I love it when you call me Big Papa.
Throw your hands in the air if you's a true player.
I gotta follow your sergeant's directions or get your ass popped with the Smith & Wesson. Learn a lesson from the E's. Stay in your place and don't step to real Compton City G's.
I never sleep, cause sleep is the cousin of death. Beyond the walls of intelligence, life is defined. I think of crime when I'm in a New York state of mind.
To order, call the number on your screen.
You must be 18 or older to call.
Welcome back to GBE News. Before the break, we discussed the details of the Flight 655 incident and its impacts. But now let's take a look at how the United States responded to the situation and how it remedied the problem. In 1996, the Clinton administration agreed to compensate the Iranian government for the deaths of nearly 290 people. $300,000 were given to families with wage-earning victims, and $150,000 were given to families with non-wage earning victims, summing up to a total of nearly $61.8 million in compensation funds. This was an agreed settlement to discontinue a case brought about by the Iran government in 1999 against the US in the International Court of Justice. However, the compensation was characterized as ex gratia, or out of kindness and generosity. Additionally, the United States denied having any responsibility or liability regarding the incident, excusing the federal government from any blame. And from then on out, the Clinton administration took a softer approach towards Iran. This allowed for the United States and Iran to look past the disagreements they had in the past and move forward. Correspondent Eugene So will take it from here.
Hello, this is correspondent Eugene So from GBE News Network. And in this news segment, we'll be looking back at the mutual effort by the United States and Iran to improve relations through wrestling diplomacy, or by mutually participating in professional wrestling events during 1998. It was an example of sports diplomacy, or the use of sport and sporting events as a way to influence diplomatic, social, and political relations of different countries. This feature story is compiled of the footage of these events during 1998. For those of you younger viewers who may not know, in 1979, the Iranian people overthrew its pro-US Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, during the National Revolution of Iran. Later that year, the Iranians attacked and seized the United States Embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days until 1981. Ever since the event had ended, the relations between the United States and Iran drastically worsened. Iran had already despised the United States for making Pahlavi the ruler of Iran during a 1953 CIA-backed coup d'etat. The people of Iran felt a lasting hatred of the United States for supporting the Shah, who they viewed as a cruel dictator. Following the events of 1979, the American people began to express lasting powerful feelings against Iran, whether it be out of fear, hatred, or suspicion. In 1980, the United States voiced that view by ending the diplomatic relations with Iran. When a new Iranian president, Mohammad Khatami, was elected in 1997, Iran and the United States began to try to improve their relations. Khatami desired a dialogue among civilizations rather than a clash of civilizations, and thus he and the United States President Bill Clinton hoped that a wrestling event between the nations would help break the ice and lead to better mutual relations. In February 1998, a professional U.S. wrestling team made a groundbreaking trip to Tehran, Iran, to participate in the Chough Cup tournament. The U.S. wrestling team's visit to Iran was the first by any American athlete since the Iranian hostage crisis 19 years prior. Opposition was heavy within the Iranian government and its religious leaders, which were filled with hardline anti-Americans who tried to prevent the U.S. from participating in the tournament. One such conservative politician, Ali Asghar Hazizadeh, asked, "How can we raise the American flag in a stadium and burn it outside?" However, during the official ceremony, American flags were publicly displayed without being burned for the first time since 1979. The American wrestlers received a warm welcoming reception from the home crowd and competed peacefully against the Iranian wrestlers. The Iranian people, whose country's national sport is wrestling, appeared to be hating the American people less and less, while most politicians remained skeptical and unwavering. Following the Chough Cup, President Clinton invited the American wrestling team to visit the White House. President Clinton was encouraged by the warm reception that the wrestlers received in Iran to continue his support of increased contact between citizens of the two historically enemy countries. On April 1998, following the success of the February wrestling event, an Iranian professional wrestling team was allowed entry into the United States to wrestle against the Americans at the Freestyle World Cup tournament. However, upon arrival, the Iranian wrestlers were detained, fingerprinted, and photographed at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago for nearly 3 hours. Coming up is an interview with one such Iranian wrestler who had to go through the unfortunate event at O'Hare. Standing with me today is Iranian wrestler Razul Kadem, a former gold medalist at the Atlanta 1996 Summer Olympics.
Hello, it is a pleasure to be here on the prestigious GBE network.
The U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service at O'Hare International Airport told us that since 1991, fingerprinting and photographing has been a required procedure for people visiting the United States from the countries for the first time, notably Iran, Iraq, Libya, and Sudan, which are considered terror-supporting countries by the U.S. government. How does your team feel about the incident?
It definitely was a bad experience to be treated as criminals. However, we're going to have to put this behind us and turn the page on the incident. We are professional athletes, so we are having to act professionally about the issue.
Do you support the increased peaceful activity between Iran and America through sports?
Most definitely. Perhaps these sporting events can bring about better relationship between two countries.
Do you think the lasting resentment between Iran and the United States is still prevalent in the views of most Iranian people?
I think that the resentment is starting to die down with some Iranian people. especially because the sports and entertainment. I was pretty surprised at how much people, the crowd cheered the American wrestlers at the Tactic Hub. However, Iran is a very religious country and is led by very religious people who dislike America. So the resentment definitely still exists in Iran.
Alright, that will be all. Thank you for your time and good luck in your future endeavors.
Most definitely.
The Iranian public was infuriated by the U.S. treatment of their wrestlers in O'Hare, an incident they viewed as unjust. On July 17, 1998, Attorney General Janet Reno responded by permitting certain non-immigrants from Iran, Iraq, Libya, and Sudan into the United States when such an action was deemed to be in the interest of foreign policy or national security. Thus, athletes from the four countries were now exempt from the 1991 policy, encouraging the sports diplomacy to continue in order to better relations with Iran. Although these wrestling events were a positive first step at normalizing relations between Iran and the United States while the rest of the world silently watched, the results were less successful in the political stage. Sentiment between Americans and Iranians improved, as mutual tourism and sporting events continued without further complications. However, political relations were not improved much, if not at all, because Iranian conservatives and stalling nuclear talks continued to hinder the chance of friendship between the two countries. As a result, even today, the two nations still have not restored diplomatic relations with each other. U.S. foreign policy of sports diplomacy with Iran more successfully improved social relations of its civilians than Russians in the Cold War, which went through the Red Scare as well as the U.S. boycott of the Moscow Olympics. However, the improved social relations were unsuccessful in bringing about better relations between the governments of the two countries. It has become evident that the U.S. is no longer the supreme power that it once was many years ago and is no longer able to have its way with other countries. And now, back to the main.
All Americans remember that controversial time of May 1995 when President Clinton signed the two executive orders that attempted to fight international terrorism through such methods as implementing tight oil and trade sanctions on Iran and effectively banning all trade between American corporations or businesses and the Iranian government. After these early political and economic confrontations with the nation Clinton called a state sponsor of terrorism, tensions eased as the Clinton administration began to realize the nation's wrongdoings towards Iran in such incidences as the 1988 shooting down of an Iranian commercial passenger plane and the 1953 CIA-assisted coup that overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh. With the gradual increase in positive relations between Iran and the US, Clinton went as far as to offer an opening of official dialogue with the Iranian government in order to restore US-Iran relations. In a widely publicized CNN interview recorded early in his presidency, Khatami indicated that he was open to a fresh start in relations with the US and wanted to bring down the wall of mistrust with the American people. However, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, vehemently refused to accept President Clinton's offer for dialogue. Here is a short clip of Khatami's interview with CNN reporter Christiane Amanpour.
There is a grave mistrust between us. If negotiations are not based on mutual respect, they will never lead to positive results.
His conditions for accepting the offer were that the U.S. formally withdraw its support for Israel, end its policy of regarding Iran as a rogue state that sponsors terrorism, repeal the sanctions imposed on the country in 1995, and discontinue the accusations toward Tehran of undertaking a nuclear weapons development plan. These conditions were obviously not going to be met by the U.S., although President Clinton did consider revoking the executive orders signed in the spring of 1995. The Clinton administration faced another rebuff in response to Secretary of State Madeleine Albright's major speech in 2000. In this speech, she announced the lifting of sanctions on imports of Iranian food and carpets. She also offered to settle outstanding legal claims on Iranian assets frozen in U.S. bank accounts since the 1979 U.S. embassy seizure. Despite these attempts to appease Iran, Albright's speech was but dismissed by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei as worthless remarks. The U.S.'s reaction to these rebuffs was a continuation of public statements about the need to reconcile Iran and the U.S. Clinton took the unusual step of staying in the UN General Assembly after his own speech in September 2000 to listen to Khatami speak, a gesture to signal continued interest in dialogue. Although Khatami, as with Clinton, Without rapprochement, his domestic political problems ultimately prevented any tangible progress. In effect, President Clinton's second term resulted in a cooling of tensions that had been extremely heated since the Iranian hostage conflict of the Cold War. And although there was an improvement in political climate, policy differences remained wide. While the US sought a new era in terms of relations with Iran on a clean slate, Iran demanded restitution for the past misdeeds done to them, meaning more than a mere apology. However, it is clear that the US was changing directions in regard to foreign policy. While previously using tactics such as isolationism and alienation in order to bend the will of less powerful nations, the US began to move towards a policy of appeasement and a seeking of international peace. In addition, the US credibility and influence as a world power was evidently diminished as a result of this political stance. The US emerged from the Cold War as a victor and seemingly impregnable nation, yet a new outlook of reconciliation with old enemies, along with President Clinton's failure to mend relations with Iran, bring into question US supremacy as an international authority.
My name is Andrew Choe, and in today's segment, the effects of former President Bill Clinton's policies will be analyzed. In years prior, the US was concerned about Iran during the late 20th century due to the fear of the occupation of Israel and the concern of spiking oil prices in the US. These concerns went so far that the United States initially supported Saddam Hussein in the opening stages of the Iran-Iraq War. Upon Clinton's departure of the office in 2001, it was evident that the Middle Eastern tensions that had once presented a problem for the United States had cooled down from years past, like the long-lasting war between Iran and Iraq, as well as Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Despite the fact that President Khatami and Clinton failed to initiate an official diplomatic dialogue between Iran and the US, and that Clinton put forth discriminatory policies such as the 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, the tensions between the two nations seemed to be calm due to Clinton's efforts to mitigate the tensions. The economic sanctions that Clinton imposed on the Middle East, specifically Iran during this time, hit some roadblocks as opposition rose everywhere, from conservatives to Iranians. This, in conjunction with the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act of 1996, created humongous uproars among American allies. Obviously, with the amount of criticism that the Clinton administration received, the administration whiplashed the sanctions into the opposing direction. Perhaps as compensation for the harsh sanctions passed onto Iran, Clinton adopted numerous measures that eased existing sanctions. However, neither the sanctions imposed nor the overtures that Clinton imposed on the Middle East generated positive changes within Iranian behavioral rhetoric. Now, obviously, there's more to the story outside of the faults by Clinton. These sanctions brought up various oppositions from various countries, but a surprising opposition came from many European nations. Many Europeans were becoming dismayed by Washington's growing contempt of the United Nations, as shown throughout the whole Iran conflict during the Clinton administration, and the amount of ignorance the US showed to the UN even during the Iraq and Cuban conflicts. The biggest issues that most European leaders had during this time, however, was the way that the US tried to impose its policies onto the representing UN countries. These methods included legislation that had an extraterritorial reach, such as the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act, or through actions that forced the nations to be involved in them, such as airstrikes. These concerns could have also risen by the fact that if a conflict were to emerge outside of the US and Cuba, Europe would have to pay the price, and although they didn't appreciate Hussein, similar to the US, they felt as though the moralistic stance held by the US was empty, and that the Middle Eastern and Cuban countries were paying the price by the US sanctions. It's safe to say that others inside the country did not appreciate the actions from Clinton as well. Conservatives also took shots at Clinton's policies during the time, and looking back at it in hindsight clearly provides a refreshing view. We have a former representative of the House, Republican Eugene would do that, to talk about the former president's foreign policies. Welcome, Representative Dudad. I hope you had a nice flight.
Oh, don't worry about that. It was a great flight.
Sounds good. So, today we're talking about Bill Clinton's foreign policies. So how are your reactions then compared to how your reactions were when they were passed?
Well, Andrew, I have to say that the sanctions fell short of doing anything helpful. These sanctions were necessary for the Middle Eastern countries to cooperate, but Clinton's administration certainly thought so. Mr. Clinton clearly overreached his attempts to mitigate conflicts, even though going as far as offering blueprints in technological development and uranium enrichment in order to ensure that the Iranian government wouldn't pursue the creation of nuclear weapons.
Ouch, that seems to be pretty foolish. It seems as though he wasn't the right president to fit the bill. Well, Representative Dudette, it has been a pleasure to have you on the set, and thank you for the time.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me.
Well, my name is Choe, and we're now going to go back to the studio.
We GBE, we just gon' say bang bang.